let's explore that a bit further. Okay, sources of rent. The I'll just stray into this. I think this is maybe sort of going over stuff that like this point anyway. So I'll go very quickly. Um, Source of rent. Land or wealth is a natural power as opposed to wages. Um, okay, it just sits there. We need it. Our business profits are a bit like savings and taxes. Okay, they eat into rent, but a lot of business, especially like Bob the barber, or Bill the barber, whoever it was, he is taking home partly a wage for cutting hair, and he's partly taking an entrepreneurial profit because he's employing other barbers to cut a lot more hair than he'd be able to do himself. So business profits kind of straddle the wages line. They're partly return for labour and enterprise. One way or another, they're sort of involved in the land side of things to the extent that businesses have their own land. Okay, and we talk about corporate property. And those of you in the class who are property people would know exactly what that means. And there are a number of property experts, people with property degrees, who would end up working for businesses with no apparent connection to real estate, but who own a lot of real estate and know that it's a vital part of their businesses, the firm's, overall strategy. Okay. Now, talking about sources of rent. We talked originally about David Ricardo in his agricultural environment, and we'd say, oh, yes, the quality of the land here. And that's the example which is usually given when we're introducing Ricardo. That's one thing. But if you look around this sort of Australia, the most valuable real estate isn't on the farms. In fact, the most valuable real estate, dollars per square metre or whatever, is in the cities. And so that means the agricultural property, I mean, who gives a hoot about the agricultural potential of the land underneath, a Stocklands Mall shopping centre or an office tower or an apartment block or something? It's not agricultural property quality. You'll find that the highest land values happen to be where you've got the highest populations. We could say a lot about that, but I want to talk about a lot of other things. I'll just put that out there. But by and large, the fact that you've got people nearby sends prices up. It sends it for two reasons. One is that you've got more people, arguing with each other, trying to get access to land. So that's one side of it. But the other thing is that if I live out the back of Nyngan in New South Wales, it's called Burke, life is pretty dull. If my car breaks down, my computer breaks down, if I want to go out for dinner at a nice restaurant or what have you, I've got to drive for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles. And likewise, if I'm in sort of a city like Brisbane or Sydney, if I'm in the middle of the city, everything's happening there. Lots of goods and services, lots of companies kind of to solve all sorts of problems. There are good hospitals, good schools, places to fix my computer, fix my car, nice places to buy, shiny new nice things and so on. And so being in the centre of population causes the land values to go up. I'm talking in terms of rent here. We're familiar now well enough with capitalisation to know that rents drive capital values. And so if there's a source of rent, it's also a source of capital value for land. Okay, so agricultural property, yep, that's kind of base level. Population in the modern economy, especially in the developed world. And you see that as you go from the city to the country. And even from, say, Brisbane to Toowoomba to Emerald to, some nice little town sort of out in central Queensland somewhere, where you might only have a couple of hundred people and, it's quite tiny. Those population numbers drive the value of the real estate. There's some other things, though, and that is that there are things which can enhance the value of the land, okay? The starting point that we sort of came in with is when, Captain Phillip hopped off his boat. But you see, by the time you've got, 10,000 people in Sydney or 100,000 or a million, at each one of those points, for no other reason apart from all the people there, the land values are being driven up because things are able to run a lot more productively as a result of the people. Okay, nothing more. You notice this, especially if you've got your eyes open. If you go to a smallish town, pick any particular type of business. I'll stay with barbershops. You'll find it's a lot more likely that there'll be empty seats in the barbershop in a little tiny town out in regional Australia compared to the same kind of barbershop in the middle of Brisbane or the middle of Melbourne or whatever, right? If you go to, let's say, Wynyard in Sydney and find a little hole in the wall with a barbershop set up in it, you'll find that there'll be a queue of people waiting to be shorn, and the barbers are never stopping. And that's it. That's what they do. They work really hard. They sort of charge a reasonable fee, and a lot of that is going to pay rent. Whereas if you're out in some little country town somewhere, and they've still got the barber shop, you'll walk past that shop, and many parts of the day, you'll find the barber sitting there in his own seat, sort of reading his own newspaper, waiting for a customer to come in. Okay? He's still able to feed his family. Why is that? Food's probably going to still cost the same, especially if he's buying it from Woolies or something. But the rent's so much lower that he doesn't have to cut as many heads of hair in order to be able to live comfortably. So he's got a more leisurely life. And you'll find it with mechanics and news agents and, everybody. Whereas if you get into the middle of a city, everyone's hopping. And it's because the rents are so high. So your population, the greater the population drive, it actually makes the land more productive. And this graph, even though we're separating yellow and green or whatever it is, into these two parts, we're really looking at the productivity coming off land, okay, and just how it's used. So population drives up the productivity, and that's fantastic. We don't worry about agricultural productivity. It actually does have that effect, but I'll let you fill in the gaps there. But what happens then? This looks like, the population gets stronger, or maybe there's something else that increases the rental value of the land, therefore its value. So all of this goes up. So the wages line initially goes up. What happens then? Anyone like to make a suggestion? As you sit there with everybody living well, because now our wages are well above subsistence. Well, folks.
Did you say land values go up?
Well, sorry, the productivity of the land goes up. Yep. So the population has increased. So the productivity of the land, I'm running the barber shop. And so suddenly I've got more people sitting in my chair, and so I'm cutting more heads, cutting more hair. So I've got more money in my pocket, so I can take my kids on, around the world trips, kind of every Christmas holidays. Is that going to stay there?
No.
What's going
They're
to happen?
trying to raise productivity at the moment.
Yep. But when productivity rises, does
The rents
people's
will
real
go
wages increase? What happens?
the rents will go up as well.
Exactly. Exactly. How high will they go up? Now, this doesn't happen overnight, although sometimes it can happen very quickly. And you think, well, you can't just have Lenny the landlord over here putting his rent up while the rents are still cheap over here. So, but they're going to sort of take a while before everyone sort of just feels the water. How much can I put up the rent? What kind of a rent adjustment can I make this this month or this year or whatever? What'll happen is
Well,
eventually, hmm, and you go
yeah.
back to subsistence. Okay.
Oh, so the green went down and wages went, yeah.
Yep. So wages went down. The green or the teal color that I'm using there means that the rent to land has actually got
High
bigger.
proportion, yeah.
Yeah. So even though the land is more productive, all of the productivity goes into the pocket of the landowner, whether he's renting it or whether he's thinking about selling it to somebody else and just basically passing on that benefit. But the power of the land actually takes all of the benefit. So when Australia and our politicians say, vote for me, um, sort of whatever party you're for, we're going to increase productivity. And the average person in the electorate says, oh, wonderful, that means my wages are going to go up. No, it means that your wages might go up. But then if you're renting the place you're living in, the rent will go up. And so you'll end up not that much worse or better off than when you started. And that's pretty much regardless of what happens there. There are some interesting things. You've got technology and infrastructure which can cause this. Um, when I started at the university, um, I used to talk about fax machines because they were a bit of a novelty back in the 1990s when I started this game and came out of industry. But now we're looking at other technological improvements, and the big one at the moment is AI. It's going to do this. Land values will go up as a result of AI. Standards of living will not go up. And in fact, at the moment, I think one of the interesting academic kind of questions is whether standards of living are actually going to remain the same as a result of AI. Because I reckon there's a very good chance that our concept of subsistence may actually fall as a result of AI. Anyway, you chaps can watch this space. Any suggestions or thoughts about that? Is AI going to make you richer or poorer? Or is it going to increase your standard of living or lower it?
I think initially a lot of people are going to suffer loss of employment, which isn't a good thing. Um, they say we're going to be recreated into other types of jobs, which will probably get replaced by a smarter AI than the one before. I'm really worried about AI. I don't actually find it reliable. I find it
Yep.
makes a lot of mistakes. It might be good for enjoyment and frivolous things, but when it comes down to really serious stuff, I don't really want to trust it. But that's my personal opinion. Our standard of living, it's based on more than just an economic benefit from being employed. There are a lot of other standards that are associated with being employed and being productive and having a purpose in your life. So I am a little bit concerned about it all.
No, thanks,
But
Sandra. That is really thoughtful. And I can't disagree with you. Read the history through what we call the Industrial Revolution. The steam engine was supposed to make life really, really easy for people. What did it do? It caused people to work longer hours, have a lot more employment, a lot more unemployment, and wages went down. And so the standard of living for the average person was decimated. For a few people, the people who own steam engines, they were fabulously happy because the steam engines made them a lot of profit. Oddly enough, and if you've been following what I've been describing here, if the people who owned the steam engines rented their factories, or at least the land under the factories, who actually benefited from the steam engines? Was it the steam engine owner, the factory owner, or someone else? It was the landlord. Steam engines sent wages down, and sure enough, factory owners, like business owners, well, they lived comfortably. You know, that's I'm not going to deny that. But the real winners were the people who own the land underneath the factories, and especially in places like England, where a very high percentage of factories were on rented land. So you got a block of land, you got a long-term lent from Lord so-and-so, you built your factory on it, cost a lot of money, put your steam engine into it, that's fine. And you thought, I'm going to do really, really well. Well, you're running around running your business, taking all the business risks and all the rest of it, carry on. And sure enough, the business owners, and you sort of read Charles Dickens, and they lived pretty comfortably. But the real winners were the landowners, because they didn't do anything. They didn't build factories; they just collected the land rent, and they didn't have to worry about any risks because people always wanted, if they had land in what was emerging as a industrial area in whatever part of England it was. They were always going to have someone wanting to be a tenant for them. So they took out the lion's share of the income. It actually goes a step further than that I don't want to do today because it'll get a bit complicated. Well, I'll just give you a little bit of a hint. The landowners in England through this period got in the habit of borrowing money. Firstly, to make more money. Some of them did really well from it, but an awful lot of them ended up getting skinned by their bankers over a period of time. It's one of the reasons why a few weeks ago we were looking at interest rate theory and things like that. Anyway, as I say, it's a bit of a tangent. I want to sort of stay on our focus with land because I hope you're finding this interesting. So as I say, if you get this stuff, it will be invaluable in your professional lives. Okay, technology and infrastructure. So it's actually increasing the value of the productivity of the land, but the wages line stays there if you're lucky. Okay, and we can talk more about AI, but I think Sandra, you've nailed it. I think, but we'll talk about that another time. Okay, there's another type of infrastructure. You've got technology infrastructure. This is things like sewage systems and NBN have to be the craziest thing ever invented, but what do you call it, the internet, the mobile network and all the other communication technology we've got, that has all increased the value of the land. Okay, and we can talk about that. Okay, there's physical infrastructure. Transport infrastructure I find is really interesting, right? When I was a young fella, I knew people. I come from Sydney, okay, out on the edge of Sydney, going up north, too far away from Sydney to be of any use to anyone. There are a lot of parts, a lot of little towns where people used to buy really cheap land and have weekenders, okay, and then at one point, New South Wales government put a railway, they upgraded the railway system roughly between Sydney and Newcastle. And suddenly the rail service was so good that you could hop on a train at Gosford, a whole bunch of places sort of roughly halfway between Sydney and Newcastle. And you could easily commute down to the city, do a day's work, and then commute back out to some of these sort of little towns, and people thought this is fabulous. Now we can have our weekender and we can live in there by the beach. Fabulous situation because, to Sydney people, living by the beach is kind of out of reach. But this period it happened. Okay. And so it was wonderful. The electric train service kind of up to Gosford and, up around there. Okay. What did it do? Okay. I'll tell you the story, so I won't sort of It actually, the more we improved our transport infrastructure, this is the sort of thing that happened. Living up at, I'll use Gosford as an example, which previously was a bit of a country town. Suddenly, it's a commuter town, so you won't be able to go to Sydney quite easily. And so, as a quality of life situation, I could have my fancy job in Sydney and walk down to the beach on the weekends or after work or what have you. Admittedly, I've got, a fair bit of time on the train and stuff. But that meant that the land in Gosford became a lot more productive. It contributed to people's standards of living a lot more effectively. And so it was really enhanced. But even the centre of Sydney, George Street and so on, it actually became more valuable, contributed better to standard of living because now it could service people that came from as far as Gosford. So it became more valuable and everywhere in between. Okay. And so the upside certainly affected the most valuable land, and I'll say land in George Street in Sydney, the most valuable land in New South Wales. Similar, you could use examples in Brisbane. But the further you went out into the suburbs, because the transport infrastructure was improving, it sort of flattened the gradient and it improved the overall productivity of the land everywhere, but especially on the fringes. And this is one of the curious things about transport. It's one of the reasons, you see, if you can buy, I don't know, a little market garden on the edge of town, if you know that someone's going to be putting in a monorail or, electric bus or something, that's a key place to invest in real estate because that transport infrastructure is going to drive the value of the land up really high. Now, the bright green in here. Okay, I'm living at Gosford. Suddenly I can commute to town, so it's no longer a weekender. I can sell my city house, and I'm sitting really, really pretty. I think that's fantastic. And the so on, as you go from the centre of the city out to the edges. But again, the same process happens. It might be nice while I'm actually living there and I've got my weekender, but over time, all of those apparent benefits, which I started off benefiting from personally, they end up coming back down, and the advantages of living in Gosford has now been lost because if I want to buy a house in Gosford, it's almost city prices, largely because of this flattening of the gradient. And someone living in Gosford, relatively speaking, is of a comparable standard of living to, people everywhere else. So you've got this sort of all these different processes, spotting the benefits from transport infrastructure. Again, I'll give you another Sydney example. They were talking about, or the fact they're talking about for a long time, opening a second major airport, southwestern Sydney, ultimately. The smart real estate investors went out and bought land, which, previously was just marginal sort of market gardens and things that nobody's really interested in. Suddenly, they were destined to be fabulously valuable blocks of dirt because you're going to be near this infrastructure hub. And so like logistics and so on got sort of sent out there and so on. So being able to spot this is really, really valuable. Okay. You've also got private infrastructure, things like restaurants, private businesses. They actually make the land more valuable. If I've got a really good private school, got a really good private hospital, really good restaurants, people are going to fix my car, all living nearby, that helps people to be keener to bid higher when they're either buying land or renting in those areas that are served by that private infrastructure. Oh, yeah, social infrastructure, just the fact that you've got people nearby.